Hello again, welcome back to RP-0. This is the return to flight. So let us see, we have a Gemini craft here. I had a couple open missions for a medium kind of sized crew duration, and before I proceed with my lunar plans, I've got some technology on the plate that's leading us to, oops, let's just close all this, but yeah, 160 days from hydrolox, and then things can start to fall into place where I can actually start testing and using hardware towards the moon. In the meantime, let us do a return to flight with a crewed Gemini craft. And so this is still the same version of KSP I was using in my previous RP-0 episodes. So work has begun on RSS and realism overhaul for the newest version of KSP, which at the moment I think is 1.2.2. But right now, still doing things in the previous version of KSP. So I've still got some other flights in space, like heading towards Venus and some various planets, and kind of juggling those is a bit of a challenge. So we'll see whether I record videos of those or not. I mean, if you'd like, you can give feedback of whether you really want to see, the probe that's heading towards Venus and the interaction at Venus or other things. That'll give me an idea how to prioritize whether to kind of carefully do those missions such that I can record them, or just to kind of bomb ahead and get to the crewed missions as quickly as I can. Because ideally, I'd like to complete my crewed missions to the moon in this version of KSP. So like ideally within the next month or two. Yeah, hopefully within the month, but who knows? Really just depends on when free time pops up. All right. So we've got these two crew. So those two mission heads, two crewed missions that I'm trying to complete. I'm not sure if I'll be able to complete both of them with this craft, just in terms of the way the contract system is actually structured. Also, a little out of practice of even flying this craft, so who knows how this is going to go. I should be able to get to space. We'll see if it's good enough. But there's slightly different conditions for the two contracts I'm trying to complete. So ideally, I need to get above my final orbit, which doesn't have to be once I'm done with my second stage. It needs to be above 200 kilometers, and with periapsis, and my apo has to be below 474 kilometers. That's kind of the set of conditions to meet both contracts, and then spend a little bit of duration. And this is a good duration craft, so I shouldn't have any trouble with completing the duration part of the contract. I'll stop moving the camera around. I'll pick one nice position where we can still see the ground and then leave it at that. And some feedback about I click and fidget, but thankfully, since it's been a little time since I played KSP, I do that less. But of course, if I let the habits go back, they'll go back as they were. All right, so I need to keep an eye on time to apo. Probably pitched down a little too much, a little early. It's hard to remember exactly. All right, one last camera move just so I can kind of see the rocket in profile. So time to apo is going okay. It's coming out of the atmosphere. 36 seconds left of burn. Let's just accelerate the time a little bit. I don't know, I really like the Gemini and the Titan II. It's just feels like a nice cheap combination, but maybe I just have a wrong, I have an ahistorical understanding of the actual cost of the program. But it just kind of all fits together. I like the story you can put together with it, because you're reusing hardware that was constructed. A substantial number of a lot of the cost of researching the Titan II and the cost of building it was covered because it was used as an ICBM. And a decent number of them were actually made for that program. So both a lot of the research and the tooling and construction costs were covered just by its use as an ICBM. And you just kind of get the spin-off benefits of that, to be able to use it as a relatively cheap crew launcher. Because it can throw a bit over 2 tons into, 2, 3, maybe up to 3.6 tons into space. Oh, I should have hot staged you. Oh well, thankfully the fuel is still settled enough that it will light, which is nice. In reality, I think there'd be a bit of, because the don't remember the exact term they'd use, but the stack kind of gets compressed by the acceleration. That's there's more tension put into the structure of the rocket because it's being used. Let's see, because of the g-forces from the engine, which kind of peak at the first stage burnout there, and then all of a sudden that pressure is released, and it the craft kind of springs back out of that compressed state. And I think that is partially what destabilizes the fuel. That's why the fuel, I think, in reality the concern is that the fuel will become very unstable very quickly at the end of the burn there. Let's just go down to 0 just to match this number to this number a bit better. No, we'll probably get a little less delta V out of it because we're not directly aligned. But in practice, the engine probably shouldn't be able to, like, if you fail to start up the engine before the first stage burns out, the fuel would kind of spring off. You'd have a chance of bubbles getting into the engine and causing it to fail. So there should probably be a little higher of a chance of failure there, but I mean, balancing between perfect realism and a challenge of the game and making realism overhaul even vaguely approachable to new players. All of these challenges have to be balanced. So we can see Florida fading away there. I'll just angle it so we can see island of Cuba, I think, and then there's other islands past there. My geography knowledge never sticks particularly well. Alright, so burn time. Yeah, so far these are looking good. I might even get around, that 200-kilometer altitude goal, which is very nice. So I did some quick tests in terms of what I do plan to do. Even though I don't have the technology, I can't do it within this career mode save game. I kind of took the craft that I do intend to use, kind of a Gemini Direct type craft to go to the moon, and try different testing configurations because realistically, you want to test the engines you're going to use, both for test flight reasons and like logical, historically reasons. You want to test your engines before you actually use them to send people at the moon. And I think that a Saturn IB can actually throw the craft into low Earth orbit, like with the modules that are used for the lunar mission with very little fuel in them. Kind of like how a Saturn IB was used to launch like an Apollo and service module and everything into orbit, just with much less fuel, because it could only throw something like 15 tons into low Earth orbit. Whereas the whole Apollo command capsule and service modules and everything weighed something like 30 tons in total with full fuel. So they just partially fueled it, threw it into low Earth orbit so they could do system tests and even like pretty substantial engine tests for the command service module main engine. And so I was just doing some tests to see if, okay, with less than full fuel, will we be able to test the engines in low Earth orbit using a lighter launcher? Because that would be a pretty substantial cost to have to test all the engines. If I could only test my craft in low Earth orbit, requiring a Saturn V to put it into low Earth orbit would be pretty expensive. Okay, so I need to pitch down a little bit to balance that out, because now time to Apo is further away than the actual burn time I have, and the frame rate went hugely up, very bigly. After we passed through the PQS scale space transition. That's such a substantial frame rate change, but not sure if that'll be different in future versions of KSP or not. Or maybe there's ways to tweak the graphics so that it's not such a big hit to the frame rate. Alright, so we're going to still be heading up a bit when the engine burns out, but hopefully we're moving fast enough to be in orbit. Only one way to find out. This is probably higher than I've ever been in burning out this engine, so we'll see if we have enough fuel to do that or not. Usually I kind of bank on the fact that we're so low to the Earth when the second stage engine burns out to get into orbit. And no, it looks like I did not achieve orbit with just the second stage, so I'm going to have to do a pretty substantial burn on the on the actual payload. So we'll just dump you and thrust forwards. Yep. So we'll use the main engine on this. It's a decent engine. It has a relatively low thrust in terms of G-force, but it's got a lot of fuel. Is used used very effectively in the Gemini program. The engine on this, like, you do have to. It's like a Soyuz engine, It's really good for orbital maneuvering, and in this case it'll just have to burn for a few minutes to actually complete orbit. Definitely not good space etiquette, because if this engine failed, you'd have an unexpected and kind of undesired return to the surface before you even got a full orbit. But in this case, it's actually not too bad. I just want to point out when I'm doing something that isn't good space etiquette, depending on how much people are learning their history, or they want to kind of role play and do things properly the historical or NASA way. You'd probably want to have achieved a lower orbit such that the second stage could definitely get it to orbit, and then this engine was just used to correct. Because ultimately I do want to get to an orbit where I'm higher than 200 kilometers at periapsis, and my apoapsis is like around 400. And I could have done that by getting to a lower orbit that didn't satisfy either of those conditions and then doing burns to end up satisfying both. But in this case, I did get the periapsis I want, although, I don't know, it's hard. I don't consider, right now technically it's the larger number, so is it the apoapsis? But I'm not in orbit, so I don't consider either of those numbers to be valid until I'm in orbit, personally. Oh, and that's true, I am kind of starting to head down now, so I need to be careful. Maybe I'll pitch up just a little bit. But I'm pretty sure we have enough fuel and everything, and we don't need this fuel to do rendezvous. We're not rendezvousing with anything. This is just a crew duration mission. I think one of them was for 3 days. Here, let me take a look and see if it will actually. Okay, so crew count record. No, we don't have enough for that. Crew duration record. No, we're not going to set those records. These are the missions that I'm hoping to accomplish. So one is, say, stay in this orbit for greater than half a day, and it says a crew of just at least one person. And since I have two, I'm pretty sure that would be satisfied, which is nice. So I'm pitching up because this number is going down and continuing to decline. So, in case you're curious, exactly what I'm pitching for. All right. So I think I can satisfy these, the conditions of both of these missions. And so this is a different set of conditions, and it's confusing how it shows it in both. Oh, does this one? Confused. I wonder if it actually wants me to achieve both of these conditions before. And that's a really weird looking one. It looks like it has two separate sets of conditions. Maybe I just didn't read it well. Regardless, these are the two missions I'm trying to complete, and this one's the easier one. So it just basically needs me to get into a real orbit first, which I'm pretty sure I can do. So those are the missions I'm trying to complete. Come on. Yeah, so I think just in some testing, it looks to me like I'll be able to complete the testing for my my crewed launch vehicle using a Saturn IB, which is very nice, and then carry out the full mission or more comprehensive tests using Saturn Vs. So it's fairly similar to the historical mission, space mission, except we put more time, energy into Gemini hardware, since ultimately Apollo only landed 2 people on the moon, even though it did bring a third person to lunar orbit. We're going Gemini direct, so we'll be taking just 2 people off the surface of the Earth and depositing them all the way to the surface of the moon and then bringing them back, rather than bringing a third person along like Apollo did. Alright, do I have everything turned on? Let's take a look. So there's all kinds of elements here. Let's see, take photos. Can I take photos? Sure, just no science in it. Because keeping track of everything is just, at this point in career, is what confuses me. I'd need multiple spreadsheets just to keep track of this. Log radiation, any new science in that? A little bit, sure. Let's keep the science. But what I'm actually interested in is fuel cells on, turning liquid oxygen to oxygen. Those systems are on, so my life support systems are good. And this ye olde tactless display appears satisfied. Water, oh no, right. Gemini doesn't produce drinkable water, so that's why that's decreasing. It produces wastewater, because it's not drinkable, or at least they didn't attempt to drink it. Eventually they did refine the fuel cell used in Gemini, and in Apollo they were able to drink the water, even though it made them a bit unhappy, because the water, I think it was gassy. One of the, either liquid oxygen or liquid hydrogen, I think a little excess liquid hydrogen ended up in the water, the product of the fuel cell, and so they they added Tang to cover up the bad taste of the fuel cell output water, and it made them gassy. Because burping in space is very unpleasant, because the liquid and liquid, solid, and gas mixture in your stomach doesn't separate nicely in space. They just kind of float around each other in your stomach. So if you burp in space, there's a good chance you're going to burp up something that isn't just gas. Gross, but true. So we're still heading down, which is making me more uncomfortable, because we're now, we're only 20 or so, 25 kilometers above the atmosphere. So let's just pitch up just a little more. But I still think we'll be able to carry off this mission. We still have tons of fuel. Even though the engine takes a long time to burn, it still has plenty of fuel in this service module. This allowed all the control necessary for Gemini to achieve precise orbits, demonstrate, yep, we can send people into orbit, we can achieve precise orbits with all the RCS and engines on this, as well as not just achieve solo orbits, like with just this craft getting to wherever it's asked to go to, but to be able to match orbits with something else and actually be able to rendezvous. And they did that a lot of times, like half a dozen times or so, which was, well, everything of the early American space program was unprecedented, but it was very comforting that with Gemini they were able to rendezvous and dock successfully so many times with Gemini and the targets they used. Oh yeah, see, so you can see the frame rate drop because we now came to a low enough, we're now at a low enough altitude that PQS scaled space is loading differently. Nonetheless, we're not low enough that you don't see a dynamic pressure. This number isn't actually increasing. I think the atmosphere, as we have it programmed in RSS, starts at 150 kilometers, if I recall correctly. So we still have a little ways until that's a problem. So I want to round this out here. I'll just warp since I've run out of things offhand to talk about. So let's just complete this as quickly as we can. So yeah, let me know if you think, whether you really like the planetary missions that I had underway and whether you'd like to see me complete those on video, or whether I should just kind of complete those, complete them in the background as quick as I can, and then proceed with my crewed missions to the moon, because I want to finish that. In a previous version of KSP, I started this series, and so in that I carried out a great many old missions. Oh, we're now low enough that we should start seeing atmosphere soon. That's not good at all. I carried out a whole bunch of missions that were mostly uncrewed, early space program, very cool stuff. And then at some point I switched to this version of KSP and proceeded with a lot of these crewed missions. So I'd like the symmetry of finishing, not finishing all missions entirely, just landing people on the moon in this version of KSP, and then if there's still time, if Realism Overhaul hasn't come out, I might still do some more missions in this, because my goal after that, my ultimate goal of recording this series and actually kind of genuinely playing a Realism Overhaul series, or sorry, an RP-0 series, is to land people on Mars, or at least put them in orbit of Mars, because that is something I genuinely have not done before while playing RP-0 myself. Oh yeah, we are coming down into the atmosphere. So this crew might come back. They may not make it. But ultimately, yeah, and then the atmosphere is starting to bite now that we're below 140 kilometers. So razor thin margins here. Let's see, I probably can't null out this 150 meters down. I might just cheat it because, hey, I mean, that's close enough. That's the thing with recording this and actually carrying these out. You have to have true precision to be able to carry these missions out effectively, kind of first time enough that you record it and discuss it at the same time. So I'm just going to add, not prograde, I need to go up. So I'm just going to fix my own mistake. Yep, you can totally consider me dishonest if you want to, but this is how I fix my weird little bugs if I need to. Oh yeah, we are starting to lose. See, we're actually biting just a little bit of air pressure, but it is having an effect on our orbital parameters. So let us push ourselves back up. So now we're heading up. Oh, right, and it turned off the engine. Fair enough. I suppose when you do that, I mean, HyperEdit is a very lovely, seamless tool, but there are certain things that it just can't not do. Like if you change your orbital parameters of your craft, it does turn the engine down. So we're heading uphill. That's good. So yeah, I fortunately did not complete that honestly, but hey, whatever. Get it done. Yeah, let me know whether you'd rather have me just proceed to getting the crewed missions done on video as quickly as possible, or whether I should take my time and record the missions to the planets. You know, that might basically make it take. If I just do the crewed missions, I could probably get that all done within the month. But if I have to take my time and also record the end of those planetary missions, it'll probably take a few months for me to complete this whole series of landing people on the moon, and then move on to the next one where I start carrying out the research and precursor missions to getting people into orbit of Mars or possibly landing them on Mars. I already have a little bit of that work. Like, ultimately, that's kind of stuff I've been fiddling with in Realism Overhaul for years now, making sure that things work nicely with Mars. You know, I've landed a number of things on Mars just in testing. I have created like tackless code, code for actually carrying out Mars Direct type stuff, where you breed, where you create methane and liquid oxygen fuel on the surface of Mars. And so I've got, a lot of that code kind of ready, done. The thing that always gives me the most trouble is boil-off. Both boil-off of propellants, like if you're assembling a large mission in Earth orbit, or boil-off of propellants that you're producing on Mars. And it always behaves just, relatively realistically, but unrealistically enough that I can't actually carry out the mission that I'd like to carry out. And so I'll look into, that's probably where I'll have to spend most of my time, like off-screen time, will be testing that and seeing whether it does work nicely now or not. Or whether I have to do some weird cheat to make boil-off not happen. But at some point, just because, I'd love feedback, I'd love people actually, if they can see why the code may not be working and suggest things, then I may just do recordings where things fail. Because in part, in trying to send people to Mars with this 1960s and 1970s technology, I think it's somewhat realistic that we'd have trouble, failures, confusion, etc. We'd have issues. We are low. We definitely want to be higher than we are. I thought we were going to be good just leveling off, but we are technically inside the atmosphere. So, I might, like, in testing on-orbit assembly of kind of enough fuel to send people to Mars, I might just do a test launch of that and then follow, show off the thermal characteristics and show that the fuel is boiling off in a way that I don't think is realistic, but maybe it is. Maybe people can point out what's wrong, what's actually going on, and maybe what changes to what code might be necessary to make it behave properly, or what changes to my craft might be necessary. But I definitely would like to do it as realistically as possible. Just people who've put more time into getting it right but not recording it like Shabs, I believe have succeeded at this type of thing. In assembling enough fuel in low Earth orbit to send a crew to Mars and back. But, I'd kind of like to do it myself and record it, because it's really cool that people have done these missions before. I find that really great. I just want to be able to kind of document or demonstrate it in such a way that it's reproducible. So people can see how I did it, and then as a result, that can help them to do it themselves. Because Shab's doing it has been useful and provided me some information, but for example, there's not necessarily enough information about how he went about doing it that I can reproduce it or modify the things he used to do it, to send his crew to Mars, such that I can. Alright, so I'll end this pretty shortly, but it looks like we are going to achieve orbit with my unfortunate little hyper edit. And then I'll tweak it to basically carry out this mission myself. I'll do that off screen, because ultimately it's just getting within those altitudes that I showed off and that I discussed, leaving the craft in orbit long enough, and then bringing the craft back down to the surface of Earth, which are pretty much all things I've done on video before and people have probably seen before. You can see the coast of Africa now. We were burning this for long enough that we've actually gotten out here. Alright, so I need to I'll let that get above 170, and I'll kind of keep an eye on it to make sure that that this actually ends up staying there, because we'll have to fight a bit of this a loss of speed due to the atmosphere, because we're below 140, 150 kilometers. But yeah, so this is my return to flight of this series. Provide whatever feedback you like. I'll be moving my crew towards a landing on the moon. Well, thanks for watching. Goodbye.